Are social commentary outlets displacing the influence of mainstream media? Talking about alternative media. So first up, let's welcome back to the stage. Oh, he's not even mic'd up yet. Mr. Godless spell checker himself, Mr. Stephen Knight, because we do not have enough English people at this thing. Let's go. It's like the Sugar Plum Fairy. Okay, next is a very special guest, very, very special, coming to us all the way from Australia, so you better clap louder. Claire Lehman is the founder, editor, and absolute genius behind Quillette, one of the world's fastest growing platforms dedicated to free thought, reason, and heretical ideas. If you are for some reason not a subscriber yet, and it's free, you probably should be, and you should support their Patreon. Claire's works have appeared in Scientific American, the Sydney Morning Herald, and Psychology Today, and I do not have a fun fact for Claire, but I'm sure she'll share something. Welcome, Claire. First order of business, Claire. You got to tell them something funny. Next up is a humble local Wisconsinite with a fast-growing following. Jeremy Hambley is a YouTuber focusing on, he has a following, focusing on, no, not yet, go. Focusing on areas where gaming and politics intersect. He runs 2 channels, Unsleeved Media and The Quartering, all while being an avid Magic the Gathering player and claw machine enthusiast for over 20 years. That is, wow. Jeremy's other special claim to fame is that in the 5th grade, take note, he had the notable distinction of being Reader of the Week. And how many can say that? Welcome, Jeremy, but he's already out here, so he doesn't get a song. Oh. I'm not ready for this next thing. And the reason why is we had a scheduling change, and the individual who was supposed to be here is not here due to, let's call them logistics reasons, because that's it. So our final panelist is Tim Pool, an American journalist, wow, whose unique style of interactive broadcast journalism exists at the intersection of social and mainstream media. As a producer for Vice Media, he has covered major events around the world in places such as Istanbul, Cairo, just a lot of places. Pool's coverage for Vice.com, as well as his groundbreaking live stream coverage of the 2011 protest movement, has been featured by a bunch of international, The Guardian, Reuters, New York Times, NBC, Al Jazeera, geez, there's a lot of these. Pool was featured in Time's Person of the Year 2011 as a nominee of the Time 100 in 2012 and was the recipient of the Shorty Award for Best Journalist in Social Media in 2013. You can tell I didn't write it, it was too long. Now, last thing about Tim. He sings to his friend Emily's cat by strategically changing some lyrics to meows, so he will be singing for us tonight. Welcome, Tim. And now, please welcome back to the stage our moderator for this fine conversation, the affable comedian / podcast host of Dogma Debate. Again, you all should be subscribed, David Smalley.
Thank you. How's everybody feeling so far? You having a good time? Fantastic. It's great to be here. So we're going to start it off just, I guess, with the title of this talk. Are social commentary outlets displacing the influence of mainstream media? I want to start with you, Jeremy. Is this idea of these sorts of social commentary, is it reducing the amount of influence that mainstream media has?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've never been so directly opposed before in such a readily available way, on demand. So if people want to do research on a particular topic, they can find a lot of opposing viewpoints much, much easier than really ever before.
Stephen?
Yeah, what he said. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I mean, I think we live in an age now where you've all got a supercomputer in your pocket and you are a media person. But just by default now, you can be the first to a story. You can break a story now. This is power that the citizen never had until the last 10 years or so, which is great. I think one of the concerns people tend to have with quote-unquote mainstream media now is it doesn't serve to sell the whole picture. It doesn't give you the full truth every now and then. It fails in a lot of its duties. And that became abundantly clear to me in around about 2015 when two Islamic fascists stormed the HQ of Charlie Hebdo, the satirical cartoonist in France. And what was really interesting about that in the mainstream media in the UK especially is they refused to show the satirical cartoons of Islam's prophet Muhammad. So we had this global incident in terms of capturing everyone's attention, but we weren't allowed to see what the instigation was, what the issue behind it was. And I felt that was a real failure in duty of the media not to give us the full picture. And the only way you could find them cartoons afterwards was to seek them out on Twitter or on blogs or alternative media. So I think this alternative media thing or independent social commentators, it's kind of people who are a reaction to this idea that the mainstream media is not doing their job properly.
Okay. Claire, I kind of want to pose the same question just for the first one, kind of with everyone. Do you think that the mainstream media is sort of losing influence because of this?
Yes, and I completely agree with what Stephen said. And from our experience with Quillette, we have grasped a lot of low-hanging fruit because, as you said, the mainstream media has been too timid or too skittish about certain topics. And the niche that we've really filled with Quillette is to comment on contentious issues within the scientific fields. So when the Google memo controversy broke out, we gathered the opinions of 4 different scientists and who basically assessed the memo for its scientific accuracy, and they agreed that there was a lot of merit to what he said. Maybe he didn't get all of the science right, but he was in the ballpark. But we were the only platform who did that. We were the only platform who reached out to psychologists who have expertise in the area of sex differences. Out of all the platforms in the world, we were the only one to do that. So from my perspective, when we're looking at some of these contentious, controversial topics, the mainstream media isn't doing its job, and there's an abundance of low-hanging fruit that can be grasped by people who seize those opportunities.
Cool. I think if you slide your mic a little bit higher up.
Okay.
I know it's kind of unfair because you've heard 3 different answers to this, but I'll give you a shot.
Yeah, I hope that to an extent I am proof that there's influence of the mainstream is going on. I actually think that's maybe a little unfair because I started as an independent journalist, then went to Vice and Fusion. And I've done a little bit of TV, but even when I worked for Vice, it's YouTube. Even when I worked for Fusion, it was digital, it was YouTube, it was web. And one of the reasons why, there's many reasons why I ultimately decided to go independent, but after I left Fusion, I didn't just say, hey, I'm going to start my own thing. I actually went to a bunch of different companies looking for work. And what I found was every time I tried to pitch, hey, this is the new thing that's going to be taking over, we need to do this, they'd say, oh, we don't have the capacity for that, we don't have the funding for that, there's no way we can change our operation for that. And so I thought to myself, if I stay here, it's like trying to be the manager of a Blockbuster. Why don't I go and start Netflix? Like go and do something new that, will eventually, I think for all all the problems it will bring, but all of the benefits it will bring, this is going to be a massive piece of the media landscape in the future. As much as they try to resist it, they're not going to win.
So along the lines of it sort of losing influence, do you think that it risks becoming completely extinct? Like, do you think that mainstream media will eventually die out and we end up just going to these individual, personal sort of social commentary sites for these things?
At that point, what does mainstream media mean? I mean, will Quillette become a mainstream outlet?
That's a good point.
If you look at a website like, if you look at CNN as a whole, their ratings are down just year over year. We look at the layoffs coming from all these different digital outlets. Eventually, they're all going to be very small outfits of only a handful of people, and then we will be mainstream, and it will be a slow evolution. It won't be like I don't want to tell people I'm here to destroy your livelihood. I'm just saying like, hey, here's a warning. Like, we're coming. This is what we're doing. And in 10, 15 years, this will be the mainstream, and you will be the old school, like, print is dead, that's what they'll say about you, right?
So, Claire, I want to pose a question to you. I don't think we can get out of this panel without talking about Alex Jones and InfoWars, and how recently, I think just yesterday morning they came out that PayPal has also now banned him from earning money. You know, I don't think a large financial institution would ever do that to somebody like, say, Fox News or MSNBC, but they will target someone who's independent like that. Do you think that's a concern for these social commentary sites, that we sort of have to be careful, even Patreon and things like that? Who knows? Patreon could be bought by somebody who disagrees with your worldview, and then, you know, they just stop your funding and shut down your livelihood. Do you think that's a concern for social commentary sites?
It is a concern, and it's important to always be thinking about alternatives for when those events occur. So I rely on Patreon, Colette relies on Patreon for our revenue. However, we always have to have a backup plan. So every blogger, every person who's going independent, doing their own thing, always has to have a backup plan. And it goes all of the way to building alternatives to internet infrastructure, so we don't have to rely on the same 4 companies. But that being said, I don't know the complete story behind what's happened to Alex Jones, but it is a worry, and we always have to be thinking about backup plans, because we always have to protect freedom of speech, and whether it's you go out and buy Bitcoin and explore other methods to do transactions, we always have to have that insurance there.
One of the biggest things I think that's been an issue is the lack of nuance, sort of the death of nuance, as many people talk about it. You tune into any mainstream media, whether it's Fox News or MSNBC or CNN, you find that they sort of just thrive on controversy as much as they can, even if they have to create it. And there's like 5 or 6 bubbles of talking heads, and they're just yelling at each other in talking points. I've been that person before, thought I was going to get a point out. You don't. You better have your stuff condensed down to about half a tweet, because that's all you're going to get to say. Someone's going to talk over you. You're going to get a curveball thrown to you by the host. I was on one time, I think it was Newsmax. I was supposed to be talking about, is the Mormon church actually becoming more progressive? That was the question. And the host said, David Smalley's the host of Dogma Debate. You're an atheist now. What happened? I was like, what? I read the Bible, and then I started talking about like how I became an atheist, and then I realized I never got any of my talking points. I never got to address the Mormon church or anything I came there to talk about. So to Jeremy, is it, obviously these smaller sites, the social commentary sites, have sort of helped popularize long-form discussion, podcasts, YouTube, things like that. Does that mean it's here to stay? Like, is that maybe part of why mainstream is losing out? Is more and more people are sort of becoming aware that these mainstream media, when it comes to political heads talking, they're just fighting. People are tuning into podcasts for real conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely here to stay. The form will always be changing, and that's how we'll stay ahead of it. Long form, short form, adopting new media early. These are the ways that small, nimble creators can stay out in front of these behemoth news agencies and things like that. And I think hopefully it is here to stay, and I hope it continues to evolve and grow. And you know, when you see stuff like what happened to Alex Jones, which is disgusting, regardless of what you think of his opinions or not, you see mainstream payment processors like MasterCard now coming in and flexing on creators and getting their Patreon banned. It's super frightening, which is why you have to always diversify. And you know, as creators, we sell merch. Maybe we have a Patreon. Maybe we have a maker support. I'm at the level where I'm like, hey, let's go. To go forward, we have to go back. So maybe I should start soliciting like checks from like you get from your grandma. Like, mail me a check every $5 every month, and yeah, and they won't take.
I think you have to come up with like a vial of holy water first, and
Yeah.
send that to them.
Right, sprinkle it. Yeah.
Okay. No, I mean, you know, the fact that MasterCard and those folks are doing that, you're right. It's scary. But do you think these large financial institutions have the right to shut down these individual? Because this is where we get into, you know, these private companies. Do they have a right to do that? We tend to be advocates for that. But Where's the line there for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think when it's politically motivated, it's a letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. And in many ways, they have as close to a monopoly as they can without getting government regulation and being viewed as one. So they're in a position of power over the masses that is unprecedented. And I mean, of course it's legal. I can't say it's not because clearly, but it's definitely messed up and it's wrong. It has to stop. And I think now that we've seen them successfully do it, like to unperson Alex Jones, the same way they went after PewDiePie. Once they realize that there's a crack in the armor and that they can do it and not face like a huge lawsuit or some federal regulation, it's going to get way worse. And I don't mean to fearmonger, but
if I could jump in, that's like, these mainstream news companies are this one person swatting at a swarm of bees, thinking, oh, I can see one I can hit. Yeah, but there's 100 right over here. You can keep swinging all you want, but there's a swarm you're going after. They look for when they look into the swarm, they see those big outliers. They say PewDiePie, he made a mistake, we can go after him. They see Alex Jones, we can go after him. But then there's smaller channels, the novels that they don't see that will become bigger, and it's going to keep happening until they're gone.
But do you think, though, that could alter behavior? Like, are they trying to make an example out of these folks to keep smaller YouTubers and smaller podcasters quiet from not doing those types of things?
They're just thrashing in the water. They're frantically struggling to stay afloat, and they're doing whatever they can. And it's just, when I look at this, it's sad. Because they're layoff after layoff after layoff at all these companies. They were the kings for so long. Mm-hmm. Then you had this wave of digital media that were supposed to be the next big wave. You had, look, Vice was built $5 billion company, and their revenue is nowhere near any of these other companies, but the idea that it was going to take over was there, and then they laid off their Vice News team, and then BuzzFeed just killed their podcast team. It's like, everyone was looking at it. You know what? I'll just end with this that famous quote that humans won't have to adapt to change; they have to adapt to rate of change. So I think we're all susceptible to some dramatic change soon too. Who knows? But they're certainly getting left behind.
I think you get into tricky territory when we're talking about compelling private companies to accept the business of anyone that applies for it or wants to use it. I think we need to create a sort of an environment where it's deeply unpopular for these places to shit-can creators, and to the point where they know it's a bad business strategy to behave like that because they'll become unpopular, they'll lose business themselves. Not quite sure how we get there, but I think trying to compel PayPal to accept Alex Jones back, I don't think is a fair way to approach it.
I think it's critical mass. If there will come a time where I certainly don't think Alex Jones will be the person, right? If you're a fan of him, it's unfortunate, but there will come a time where somebody who got 2 million subs, let's say Joe Rogan. Let's say Joe Rogan gets the axe. Then you're going to see the normies, I'm using it unironically, but they'll rise up and say, whoa, this is Joe Rogan. And then all of a sudden, PayPal's going to be like, we're losing serious business by crossing this mainstream celebrity. And they put Rogan on that weird list, you know what I mean? Like, accusing him of being connected in this weird network. It's like, that's ridiculous.
Jones and I said nothing.
Yeah. Well, didn't he get cut off iTunes? I thought he did.
Who?
Rogan?
There might be more to the story.
I don't think so.
There might be
Oh,
some information that we're not privy
Maybe
to.
got cut off
in
from
that
reality
particular
quite
case.
some time ago.
Yeah.
Stephen, do you think that the quality of content is being diluted?
It's a mixed bag. I think anyone can call themselves a journalist and doesn't necessarily need to be qualified, which isn't a bad thing. I think your work should speak for itself. But it has opened the door as well to people who've probably got no business reporting and trying to bring news to people because they're not objective or they're pushing an agenda. As well as it's helped people like Colette and Tim to do his work, it's also helped propagandists and people who've got ill intentions to basically sidestep any sort of legal framework or business structure and just say whatever they want. So it's a double-edged sword in that sense. So it is. I think you have mainstream news channels competing with each one. I think in the alternate media, I think there's a little bit of that as well. People trying to rise above other voices.
Well, I want to pose a similar question. I want you to respond to that in a second, but I kind of want to tie on to that with you, Claire. A lot of times, whenever we hear something or we read an article, and we're like, I don't know if that's true or not. At least the true skeptics in the room will go, let me double check that. Some sources I trust. Now, that may not necessarily mean that those sources are accurate, but it's ones that we've heard a lot. Like you may see something on a website you've never heard of and go, let me check. Even the mainstream ones, the CNN, the Fox, the MSNBC, and go, is that being reported widely? Do you think that that could be an issue for startup sites? Like maybe they're not going to be trustworthy, so they don't get shared as often.
Certainly in the beginning, but I think in this environment where there are so many new starters, you can quickly gain a reputation for honesty and integrity. And it's important in the news space to admit mistakes when you make them.
Oh, that's good.
And if you're aiming for accuracy, you have to make corrections and record that publicly. And I think individuals and small organisations can easily build a reputation for truth-telling and independence. I mean, it's tough. Like, you have to be brave. You have to own up to your mistakes when you make them. But certainly many of the legacy brands have trashed their own reputations over the years through chasing advertising revenue through clickbait, not correcting errors when there are obviously errors. I mean, the most salient example would be the interview of the Channel 4 journalist with Jordan Peterson. You know, the amount of damage that would have done to their brand is enormous. And they can't build themselves, you can't build your brand back up after that. And just The Guardian, the way they've chased advertising revenue through clickbait, like these atrocious opinion articles that are meant to inflame readers, not educate or inform readers. How can their brand is over 100 years old. How can they rebuild the trust that has been lost? Just over the last 5 years, they're chasing this cheap advertising revenue through this clickbait model. They can't do it. So being an outsider and being a new creator, you're sort of almost at an advantage because you can consistently go after accuracy, correct mistakes when you make them, and aim for honesty, I think.
It helps when they write hit pieces about you too. Like, they're almost at that point where they're so uncredible that when they write a hit piece about somebody, people are like, oh, I want to see what this person has to say.
Yeah,
Maybe, you know.
So I don't think credibility is going to be an issue, and it's not a good thing. Why is it that there are so many new digital media outlets getting massive and absurd funding, and they somehow have this strange authoritarian leftist agenda? A lot of people say to me that it's a conspiracy. They believe it's on purpose. I don't believe that's true. I believe there's certainly activists who have an agenda who do lie. But I'll tell you exactly what happened. In the early 2000s, when blogs started rising, the honest and fair journalism doesn't do well because people trust what they already think is true. So credibility isn't the issue. If the Huffington Post writes a piece saying, this cop is racist, people are going to be like, I knew it. And they're going to say, I trust them because they're telling me the truth because they're hearing their own worldview parroted back at them. What then ends up happening is companies like this get a lot of traffic. Investors see that and say, whatever they're doing is working, give them money, I want to invest in this. And then 10, 15 years later, we now have massive digital New York enterprise where it's founded by far-left activists who hire people who they think are... I actually had somebody who was in prison for extremist activity on the far left tell me he was a centrist. Because that's what they think. Look, I think there are good people on the left and the right, but when it comes to extremists, they surround themselves by people who believe the same thing as them. They start companies, they start hiring people because they think that's the normal opinion. And then all of a sudden you end up with this New York ivory tower of people who don't understand what's going on in the rest of the country. So I think that's how we ended up with the biased, and I wanted to add this to the comment before about how the propagandists, how they're taking over. It's because it works, it gets clicks, and people trust things they already think are true.
And in a way, Facebook has sort of mastered both sides of that because the algorithms now are, oh, you're conservative? I'll show you conservative stuff that you like to click on. Oh, you're liberal? I'll show you liberal stuff you like to click on. And they don't have to pick sides. They can sort of benefit all the way around.
There was this program, I can't remember who did, I think Wall Street Journal, where it was a Facebook feed, and you could click Democrat or Republican, and it would show you what the different person sees.
Wow.
It was crazy. Yeah, it's like the stories were inverted. You'd see a story where it would say, like, racist cop kills teenager, and you'd click Republican, and it would say, violent gang member attacks cop. You know what I mean? It's like, wow.
Wow. So, Jeremy, I want to go to you, and I'm going to pose the same question to you, Claire, as well. Do you think the subscription model, the Patreon model, the individual subscription model type plan is enough to keep these social commentary sites afloat?
No, I think they're too vulnerable too. As somebody who was wrongfully banned from Patreon and backed, other products, and back to other other options. Maker support came out. May rest in pieces, Maker support. But Stripe is ahead of them. They're just like, nah, we don't like it. We're not gonna process your payments. Now we know PayPal has already been doing that. And we know that, in my opinion, the far left is very good at organizing and applying pressure to Patreon or PayPal and things like that. And they know how to get people deplatformed. So, it's great while it lasts, and I'm happy for people that have it, but you have to, in the way that like super chats on YouTube have become super important, there's a hit piece about them. BuzzFeed wrote a hit piece about how super chats are often used to spread hate speech. No screenshots, no nothing. Most of my super chats are telling me to like stroke my beard or something weird, Like they're not.
Hey, I know what I like.
Yeah,
I know what I want.
I give the people what they want, but like, and I know, and then so they come after that, right? And so you have to always. It's part of your job to, you sell merch, you sell, you do meetups. When you're a big fancy star like Sargon, you can have a meetup and make money that way. And he has to do it, because if you rely on one thing, then it's way easier to wreck you.
So you said Colette exclusively relies on Patreon right now, or do you also do ad revenue as well?
That's our patronage is our number one revenue stream.
Okay.
But we are going to diversify, and we will look to diversify.
Is it for that reason you believe it's not enough to sustain?
Well, there's the vulnerability. Or there's always a vulnerability, and you don't want to put all of your eggs into one basket. But I will say that I do think crowdfunding is a very good model for content creators. And, although there are examples such as Alex Jones, we don't have to be too paranoid. I mean, we've got to have backup plans, we've got to diversify, but we don't have to be too paranoid that we're going to have our cash flow cut off tomorrow. And I would say additionally that readers or viewers of content, people often say people won't pay for content, they're accustomed to getting it for free. Well, I would say that people will pay for quality, and they will pay for content they know is grassroots generated. So it doesn't come from a big corporation, it doesn't come from some, as in some media mogul's pet project. If people see that there's a grassroots organization and there's some community behind it, they want to buy into that. They want to contribute $5 a month or $10 a month. And I would encourage people to definitely prioritize crowdfunding over any kind of advertising model. Advertising is gone. It's over. And but just always have a backup plan.
It lets people connect too. Like, I find people will also support somebody they can relate to, which is more difficult when you're mainstream media. Like, BuzzFeed isn't getting super chats when they're live streaming, but if they feel like they can relate to you, then that's super helpful, and that's unique to a smaller.
Authenticity is, it's a real currency at the moment, and people want quality, they want authenticity. They don't want some manufactured global brand. They don't want to pay for the McDonald's of media. That's over. That's back in 1990s, People want something different. They want authenticity. They want to feel like it's a grassroots, independent, honest enterprise.
Just to play devil's advocate for a moment, let's try to, I just want to flip the other side of this and say, to think of the negatives of this. So we're talking about sort of being in your own bubble, right? And that's kind of what this conference is about, is getting out of your bubble. But if we do end up with, conservatives find a small conservative news source and that's what they listen to and that's what they read, and then the liberals are looking at their stuff and the far lefties and the far right wing, and if we're all just sort of in our own bubbles reading our own independent small things, I'll start with you, Stephen. What are some of the negatives that could come from that, and how can we overcome that?
Well, it's interesting. I suppose you have to wonder, is it possible to reach a certain level of popularity and maintain your...
Move your mic up.
Hello. Hey!
Hey, Stephen, shift it to this side so that when you're talking...
So people can hear you?
Yeah, no.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I have been speaking for the last 20 minutes. That's why no one's responding. It's great.
It hasn't been worth it, trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey, he called me a dick in the first panel. Go back and watch it.
fact. Yeah, what was I saying? So, yeah, I mean, is it possible to be a really big media source and maintain the authenticity Claire was just speaking about and your integrity? I mean, does that appeal to a mass market in a sense? Is it quite esoteric to focus on current events and topical news stories in them kind of principled ways? Is that something that appeals to the masses in general? And I'm not sure it does. I think there's an appetite for it, and I think that's a reaction to the mainstream, but it still seems quite, I mean, we're talking about it in terms of alternative media, aren't we? And we're calling it alternative for a reason.
I'm getting at, though, do we run a bigger risk of people staying in their bubbles? Like if you start a small news site, a small article site, and that's who you trust, isn't that kind of the same thing? Like how do we diversify our worldview if we only pay attention to those things that already agree with us? Kind of what Tim was talking about.
Yeah, I think we've all had that experience where we've seen a news story and it's come from a source we're not big fans of. So we've gone and double-checked it with a source that we're more comfortable with, and then
Right.
we've shared the more comfortable source rather than the original source.
But to
that you
Tim's
found.
point,
Yeah.
if it comes from a source we already like,
I
we're
think-
less likely to fact check it.
And I think it depends on the individual. I think it depends on your character. Some people want to find the truth. Some people want to know the details. Some people just want their own views reinforced to them, and that's what they seek. They want their prejudices confirmed. So it's all about mindset more than having plenty of sources to choose from.
We have a human culture problem that I don't know if it can be solved, right? People, there's a lot of people who follow me who, like, a handful of people just told me today, they're like, I disagree with you on everything, but I respect that you try to be honest. You know, I'm never going to call a Trump supporter, thank you. I'm not going to call him a Nazi, right? And so when I was covering like Occupy Wall Street, I was actually kind of scared of like the right wingers who came down to Wall Street to protest pro-life stuff. And we were like, all the activists were like, oh man, we're going to go infiltrate. And it was this really strong sense of the other. And we were like, dude, a bunch of like gun-toting, like army camo, flag waving, crazy science deniers. There was a bunch of old ladies. And so I was like, so something I thought was wrong. And then when I went to this event, I was at the Deplorable, right? So like the Trump thing, right? And a bunch of people came up to me and they told me they were occupiers. They were like, we've loved your work since Occupy Wall Street. Shook my hand. And I was like, but you're wearing MAGA hats. And they're like, oh yeah, like we were supporters of Bernie and now we're supporters of Trump. And I was like, whoa, something is different here. And so, basically the point I wanted to make is, I think because I don't insult people and generalize all conservatives and say like, I think, all conservatives are bad people are willing to hear me out, but most people don't do that. There are people that I think are pretty good on the left, on YouTube, and I think sometimes they can point the finger and insult somebody and go after them in a way that cuts people off. But this is also true for some of the people who are here today who have channels that are critical of like social justice, who are mean. And what that immediately does is it makes you an other, and then so somebody feels slighted because their game has been changed. They're going to gravitate towards someone who's defending their position. We all do it. So the only thing that's going to change this is if everybody here is willing to say, wow, it pains me to actually watch someone who says these things, but I have to watch it to understand them. And I want to add one last thing. Subscribe to someone like David Pakman and ContraPoints so you can hear what nice people have to say, even if you don't like them, even if you think they're wrong. You got to do it. You can think they're wrong, you can think they're mean, but the reason why I say Pakman and ContraPoints is that I think Contra's fantastic, actually. You can disagree with me, but David Pakman, he has actually reached out to me. He talks to me, right? There are so many people I've tried to interview on the left who I've known for a long time who are like, you know what, I'm just not willing to do it. But David was like, oh yeah, let's try and figure something out. I'm like, cool, that's respectable. And that's what we need. We need people willing to cross those lines, even if it hurts them mentally.
Well, that's why I subscribe to you, Tim, even though you called me a dick.
I said, the worst thing you can say about Jeremy is that he's an asshole.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Okay, that is better.
He's a dick.
I hope the first
Yeah.
question is how much of a dick Tim is. So if it's not that, you're failing.
I'm mean sometimes. I try not to be.
Q&A.
Actually, my first question is to Claire. I was wondering if I could have a moment of your time, and would it be possible to have a video essay featured on Quillette explaining why people should care to join the Liberalist group?
Oh, come and talk to me after the event and I'll give you my card.
Absolutely, thank you very much.
No worries.
And Tim is awesome.
I was actually going to say he's not a dick, he's just addicting.
Yeah.
We need that correction.
That was a really good pun. That was a really good pun.
All right. What's your question?
Oh, can I go?
Yeah,
was
no,
waiting
go
on
ahead.
them.
Don't worry about
Okay.
that. I got this.
So, with relations to the direction that censorship has been taking with multiple companies seemingly conspiring, I'm curious if this has anything to do with maybe government control. Like, if people have anyone looked at perhaps the idea of the CNN effect, where basically the idea is that because you want to protect American interests like the military, you consult with them before you actually publish certain stories. Do we believe that perhaps that this will escalate in the age of the new media, which would be somewhat like you guys, but would take on a sort of effect that we might not see until a few years later? How do you guys think generally that's going to be directed, especially since you're more individualistic with each and every one of you having your own criteria?
Is that directed at someone specifically on the panel?
Tim Pool.
Okay.
Can you
Obviously.
like give me a concise, simplified?
Thinking like, if you're thinking about CNN effect, imagine how we're talking about specific things like the war in Iraq, for instance. We don't just simply say, oh, they're going to be bombing this and this area in Fallujah. They consult with the media. But imagine that on every other scale, including economic and whatnot, because you'd want to protect corporations so they don't take jobs away from millions of people. Like that sort of effect. Do you believe that's going to be, how do you believe that's going to be thrown onto your guys' shoulder once you become the quote unquote new media?
Yeah, because I have a negative.
So I think the issue, it's probably legal and to do with national security law. So if the government can prove that you're taking money from governments that aren't friendly with the United States, you're going to be at risk of being prosecuted under some kind of national security or criminal law. So I think probably Alex Jones, there's some stuff that the public isn't not aware of, and there might be some government legal action going on there. And I think for people like us, we're not taking money from Russia or hostile governments, there's probably little risk. But then there may be a risk if many of your patrons come from a hostile government.
I mean, I set up a GoFundMe and made a video because I wanted to go to Sweden, and then Paul Joseph Watson donated to it, and now they're claiming I work for InfoWars. I can't control who donates to me, and no one has creative control of what I do, but it doesn't matter.
Next question.
So I was wondering, this is for the whole panel, what you guys would think about an Internet Bill of Rights. I know Styx, I know he's not here, but he talks about that quite a bit. Basically saying that the internet, open internet, it's a public forum, it's the public space, everyone has a right to speak, and the freedom of speech should be applied to those corporations just as much as it applies to the government for online.
Okay. Let's start with you, Jeremy.
Subscribe to Styx, Hex and Hammer, 666. Don't mind the 666 on the end. It was randomly generated, I think. But I'm a huge fan of it. Really, I am. I'm not very, I'm not very political about the details. I don't know, but yeah, people. I mean, this is the new public space. This is a new public forum, and it's being censored, and that has to stop.
Yeah, I tend to agree because people will always come with the refrain when someone gets banned from Twitter, they'll say, well, it's a private company, they can do whatever they want, like a mantra, and that's correct, but we can also be critical of their anti-free speech ethos, and we've got to think in bigger terms than this, because Twitter's not just some app in your pocket anymore. It's helped start revolutions. It's helped share, win elections. It helps share information and news up to the minute. It's one of the most powerful and influential tools on the planet now. And I think if one company's got the power to say which voices should be heard and which shouldn't, that's a very dangerous power to have.
Yeah, it's tricky because the alternative to having private companies is having the government. nationalize something like Twitter, and do we really want to
Should
national?
there be like an internet bill of rights, as he was talking about?
Yeah, but is it going to be applicable? The internet is global. I mean, you can't. Are we going to have international treaties protecting the freedom of the internet? You can't have that. And the biggest, because I mean, international law is how do you enforce it, right? So, and the biggest pushback against the big tech companies in Silicon Valley is not from the United States, it's from Europe, legislating against them for all sorts of different reasons. So, you know, the alternative is to nationalize some of these in each individual country, and then that takes away from the global nature of the internet. So I think there's no easy solution. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
First, let me just say, the First Amendment protects, I believe, 5 different rights, one of which is freedom of speech. Freedom of speech exists as a principle outside of the United States government. It exists in the different parts of the world, and that means if Twitter decides to censor you, they have violated the principle of freedom of speech. It has nothing to do with the First Amendment. So we can criticize social media for violating freedom of speech, and then everyone posts that ridiculous XKCD comic. They have no idea. He has no idea what he's talking about. He made a mistake. I accept that, but I kind of just lost my train of thought because I'm really frustrated on the free speech thing. But let me just say this.
Internet Bill of Rights.
Look, you can't have CNN mention, I think, around 16,000 times Russian collusion and tell us nonstop, day after day, that the Russians hacked our election using social media. And then when you get a bunch of people going, maybe we should have protections on the right to speech on this platform because we know how influential it is, then all of a sudden you have a bunch of activists going, oh, but it's a private business. Well, you're the one telling me that the foreign governments are manipulating our opinions through the system. Shouldn't we protect it and guarantee the rights of our own citizens to use the platform in such a way? Yeah. Why are we debating? So I don't know about an internet bill of rights, but this is one of the things that really frustrates me is everybody tries to say that I'm a classical liberal because that's like the thing that people are saying. But I've always been a social liberal, and I'm not opposed to regulation, especially of massive multinational billion-dollar corporations that have investment from, I think, a Saudi prince. You know, so yeah, Twitter. We shouldn't have foreign investment in a company that we know is influencing our elections. And let me just say one more thing. Maybe on a tangent, we're going to talk about Russian meddling. What about Al Jazeera funding news organizations? What about what about Telesur? They're also funding this stuff too, and it's like nobody wants to talk about it. So maybe we see Congress say, you know, when they had the hearing with Jack Dorsey, most of them talked about meddling, and I'm like, you know what? I think we have 2 things to deal with. So I respect them talking about meddling, but I think they're not focusing on the core issues. Some of them brought up really amazing issues about bias. Like when, I can't remember the representative, he said one of his staffers created a new account in DC and was only recommended Democrats. I'm like, okay, that's worrisome. And then, you know, so we've got the domestic issue of protecting the rights of our own citizens to interact on a platform we know influences elections versus preventing foreign governments from influencing our elections. They both really matter. We need to regulate this. I don't know to what extent we regulate it. I don't know how we do it. I lean in favor of we should do something instead of nothing, but I could be wrong. I'm not the smartest person.
Tim, I love you, man. We gotta.
All right, let's go.
I think some great points were made there, but my question is for quartering. When will Hasbro pay for their crimes?
I didn't hear it.
Can you repeat that? I didn't hear it.
Yeah.
We didn't hear the question.
When will Hezbollah play?
Oh,
Oh, when will Hasbro
when
pay
Andy
for their
Worski shows
crimes?
up at their door, I think is when that's going to happen.
All right. Next question.
Hi, my name is Jerry. My question.
You gotta lean into that thing.
Okay. More for Tim. Do you think independent media would be better served if people are upfront about their personal bias and present it through that bias, or if they take a more classical view of journalism and step outside of that to be more objective?
Oh man, maybe a little bit of both. I think for one thing, just be honest. You know, so I can respect someone. You know, I really, really disagree with a lot of what Lauren Southern says and does. But she flat out says why she's doing it and what she does. So I'm like, well, at least any new viewer is going to understand what they're seeing. And you know what? When I see a website like the Daily Beast claim to be objective, but then insert random nonsense they made up, I'm like, they're lying to you.
Most
right?
people know when they're watching or reading something about your bias. And I think it's good to just kind of put it out there.
Is everyone aware of their own biases to be upfront about it, though? That's the thing.
Yeah, maybe
Some
not.
people are more aware than others.
Just be honest. I wish, but
Yeah.
people are dirty liars.
Hello. First of all, hi Jeremy. I'm one of your mods on your Discord.
Oh, hi.
This is a question just in general for.
Can you come close to the mic?
Oh
please?
yeah, sure.
Yeah, lean in.
Yeah.
Real
How's
nice
this?
and tight. There you go.
Deeper.
Okay. Deeper.
You want me to fellatio it? All right. The question is concerning.
Twitter's already mad at me. I'm making no comment on that whatsoever.
Okay, this is related to Twitter. Now, considering all the problems that we're currently having with mainstream social media, do you think it's more viable that we just let the market take care of itself with sites like Gab and Minds and etc.? Because they seem to be filling this problem in of itself, where Gab is very much pro-free speech. Minds, I have my grievances about them because there was an incident, but not going to get into it. My point is, do you think that could be a viable solution as opposed to just regulating these websites?
I think he was.
Oh,
talking to
I'm
you.
I'm a fan of the free market. So, if it takes a while, I've been waiting for Twitter to die for like 3 years, and the damn thing won't go away. So, I hope it does.
But who's stopping the domain registrars from going after Gab? Google from removing Gab.
Well, their
It's
hosting
like,
company went after Microsoft Azure.
Yep.
Went after him, made him delete a spicy tweet, and it's like, oh, we're gonna just take your whole business down if you don't delete this tweet.
And
So-
when it came to Patreon taking someone down, a lot of people blame Patreon, and I'm like, Stripe is behind that.
Stripe
right?
and
then
MasterCard,
MasterCard
yeah.
is behind them.
Yep.
It's like, what do you do? How's the free market going to solve, 7 different companies in a chain, and any one of those links can break?
Yeah.
Next question.
Hello.
Hello.
My question is to the panel as well. It's a general question. I think the question at the beginning was like the social commentary outlets displacing the influence of media. I think that we can all agree that it's yes, and it actually seems to be inevitable at the rate that it's going. And we see that with Comicsgate, Gamergate, all that stuff. How they report on feminism, everything like that.
Comicsgate represent.
So my question is, with the inevitability of smaller outlets, especially individual people able to state their opinions and things like this, do you think it would be is that a good thing? Like, is it a good thing that media, mainstream media has been displaced, given that they garner this trust off of investigation and things like that? It's not what they're doing now, but it's that's why people go to them. So.
Well, I think Claire, you should probably answer that. But I think if you're getting your news from like the YouTube comment section, you have bigger problems. So you gotta know if you can trust your source. Period.
So the internet has destroyed the old legacy business model of traditional media, and that can't be reversed. And we're never going back to the old days when newspapers had a monopoly on distribution, and because they had that monopoly on distribution, they had a lot of income, and they could subsidize the investigative reporters or the court reporter, the reporter who goes and sits in a courtroom and reports on cases that nobody really is interested in, but it's there on the record. Those days are over, and it's a shame that companies cannot subsidize a lot of this long-form investigative stuff. But technology changes the world, and we have to move on. We have to adapt, like what Tim said. And I think what will happen as we move into the future of post-internet media is that individuals will develop reputations for honesty and accuracy, but we won't have these huge companies who have a monopoly on distribution, having all of this cash, employing 100, 200 people in a centralized office. That's just not going to exist. And we can't wring our hands thinking, oh, look what we've lost. We've just got to adapt to the environment that we're in.
But I would say it's bad for 2 reasons. Local court reporters keep a check on local corruption, and they're almost gone. And they're not going to be replaced by any of us. They're not going to be replaced by YouTube, or there's not going to be, as the local newspapers die, the checks on local corruption is dying with it, and that terrifies me. And that's because the cost of production for content for the average human has reached 0, as we all have a smartphone with a high-definition camera. So these news organizations can't compete, they can't make money, they can't subsidize reporters who lose money for the company, but provide a real service in keeping a check on government corruption. So.
That's great. That's great.
that leads to my question is, so in our modern environment where we have all these distributed media people, one of the things I notice is missing is comprehensive data. You know, we talk about things that are happening to individuals, but like I know that Jeremy, you had your funding suspended from Patreon. But we don't know all the names of the people who have had this stuff suspended. I don't know where to find the information where I can say, here's what's happening, I don't like it. I can point to Jeremy's case specifically and say, this has happened, I don't like it. But then that's just one person. Is there room for some people out there to collect and collate data like this to point to the problem as a systemic issue?
That's a good question.
They used to be the old legacy media that they had all the statisticians on staff and the research hours, and that content. There's a real need for it, I think, in the world where I live in commentating. I mean, really intellectual, well-researched stuff isn't that popular on YouTube, and if they can find a way to make it entertaining, I think that would be a powerful thing.
I'm hoping to get through the rest of these, so I want to keep going.
All right, cool. Yeah. John, first question, Tim, is it all just one beanie, or do you have like a drawer of those things?
I have a drawer. I have a box.
I believe
it. But one more thing. You'll notice the color of my shirt, the color of my shoes and hat match. I actually have a green outfit, a blue outfit, a brown outfit. I do. I'm being serious.
Outside of that, I also subscribe to Sticks, and on the Internet Bill of Rights, I have pretty much a question that you kind of stated. It's a nice sounding thing. Who enforces it? And how is it upheld if it does get through?
I think that's kind of the point Claire made. I don't know that it can be enforced.
Even so, the news has broken that Google have created a separate version of Google just for China, which censors all of the world's media, and not only that, but provides information about Google users, searches back to the Chinese government, which is horrifyingly scary. I think, I honestly don't know the answer to these questions, but I think it's a little bit naive to think that we can just demand these companies to enforce United States norms of free speech around the world, because other governments around the world will not permit that.
They can do it here.
Yeah.
I mean, a $50 million fine, like when they do in the EU to Google, has to matter. I assume. They have a lot of money, but I think you can enforce it locally. Or maybe the bigger deal is this new internet, this like second internet thing. That's kind of another concept that might be more efficient.
There are people working on developing alternative sort of infrastructure that the internet is built on.
Yeah.
So maybe we should try and support that.
Yeah.
All right, I've just been given the signal of 5 minutes, so let's
I believe in you guys. We can get through these four.
we keep the questions
I don't
short.
count well. 4 questions? Beautiful. Let's do it.
Let's keep it super short.
Well, my question is super short, but first I want to say thank you for showing up, Mr. Tim Pool, on such short notice. And my question is actually for you. So with your experience with both a little bit of the mainstream media and the new independent media that has come out in recent years, you guys had a conversation about whether or not the new independent media would lead to thought bubbles where people just get a skewed view of what the world actually is. But I think that can happen.
You said this was short.
Sorry. Do you think the mainstream media can also lead to those thought bubbles more or less than the independent media?
Tough question, but kind of less, because the editorial control of companies like newspapers was really restricted. They didn't have enough space. They had very limited capacity. And they wanted to maximize their market share. So they tried to kind of be middle of the road. And then once the internet happened and they started competing with, look, if you're a fan of soccer, you go to a soccer blog specific, you don't need to watch ESPN, and now they're competing with microblogs. So this is creating, it used to be one straight broadcast hour, and they had to make sure their opinion was close enough to the majority so they could sell. And now that everyone has a chance, they're desperately trying to cobble up whatever market they can, but they're shrinking. So bigger news companies actually helped keep our culture cohesive because they fed us the opinions they liked. Now we've got a million different opinions all over the place.
I want to point out some irony that may be lost on everyone, is a lot of questions are directed at Tim, And one of the chief reasons why Tim is here is to shake Claire Lehman's hand. That's really funny.
This is all terribly stimulating. That's a delay. Okay. In the context of they were talking about using your bias like as a lens for your news content, if like as a possible idea, or going with an objective journalistic view. In your opinion, if you're familiar with Philip DeFranco's approach, he says news, opinion, your opinion. How do you think how healthy is that for the independent sphere, just in general? Do you think?
You have to pick someone, and if you don't, I'm going to pick Steven.
Pool.
Me?
Thank you,
Steven.
Oh, he said Tim.
There, I guess the only thing I can really say about it is that people confuse objectivity with omniscience. There's like this idea that if you're truly objective, it means you can see everything at all times. When all it really means is, if right now, this dude punched this dude, I would tell you, hey, that guy punched that guy. But if my brother was up here, I'd be like, my brother didn't do anything wrong, how dare you? And that's bias, right? So I am objective, regardless of what I'm looking at, regardless of where I'm pointing my camera. I don't know if that answered the question, but.
Probably not.
There's an objective truth that exists in the world. There is such a thing as reality, and there are some people who are graduates from humanities courses today who work in the media who will dispute that there is such a thing as objective truth and reality, and will argue that reality is created through language and through the way you interpret events. So I think it's important for journalists to be empirical, which means that they believe that there is such a thing as reality and that you can observe it and there is the truth. There is a, people have their own interpretations of events, but if you check the facts and you seek facts, you can come to a point of truth. And I think that's important for journalists to have that kind of orientation.
On that point, somewhere in the audience, Rucka is saying that Aristotle was right. So find him, he'll talk to you about it.
All right, so it seems to me that these major media still hold a great deal of power in dictating a kind of ideological dictatorship, the so-called, what I'll call the official belief system, the Time Magazine version of reality. And what makes you think that these major media are no longer powerful? Or?
They're dying. They're bleeding money. So the New York Times is probably the most prestigious platform or brand in the world. They own a big building in New York. Half of it is rented out. They subsidize the work that they do through the leasing of their offices. Okay, so there are going to be more layoffs. They're not growing exponentially. Their cash flow, even though they've put up a subscription, like a paywall, they have to, they rely on real estate for their income. So I don't see any of these big companies surviving without the sponsorship of billionaires, or having, relying on their real estate, or some other kind of artificial crutch keeping them alive.
They're using a practice right now where they buy the rights to views from clickbait websites to claim belong to their site, so they can go to advertisers and say, look, we got 1 million views, when in reality, 20, 30, 40% of their views was like top 25 celebrity moles. And then what they do is they buy the rights to that traffic, put it under their brand name, and claim, super smooth news, I don't want to name anybody specifically, they'll sue me, but you understand.
Really quick, can I say something real, like 30 seconds?
Not even 10 seconds.
Super humbling to see everyone here, super thankful you're all here. Thank you, Mythicist Milwaukee and Mythicon, for putting this on. I just wanted to say that before. I know we're over time, so I just want to say
Jeremy Handley, friend of the show. Okay, so first thing I want to say is, if this is the alternative media that people are afraid of, then mainstream media does not have a prayer. So first of all, let's give a huge round of applause right here. Okay, secondly, and very importantly, we spent a lot of time printing up these the brochures that you have, and unfortunately, they are wrong because we had to change something. So, the dinner break is going to be right now, and unfortunately, and I was excited to hear Jason Seed, but Myth-Informed takes security incredibly seriously. I'm all about jokes, but this one is, not as jokey. So everyone, please, has to leave for an hour, and then you guys come back at 5, and we will resume. But you cannot stay here, unfortunately. I love you all.